sure it was Deepak Chopra who said he takes a negative comment and a positive comment in the exact same way, which is totally neutral. Is like, because you don't want to rely on positive feedback to get you to do things. And at the same time, you don't want to let negative feedback stop you from doing things. So the best way to go about it is to just remain completely neutral to both.
Welcome to the Manders Mindset Podcast. Here you'll find both monologue and interviews of entrepreneurs, coaches, healers, and a variety of other people, where your host Amanda Russo will discuss her own mindset and perspective and her guest mindset and perspective on the world around us. Manders and her guests will help explain to you how shifting your mindset will shift your life.
Hey guys, welcome to Amanda's Mindset. As always, I'm your host, Amanda Russo, and I am here today with an amazing guest who, in my eyes, is the perfect embodiment of following your heart. And I am here today with Christina Tsirkas. And one of the things she told me that really stood out to me when we first got connected is that she's a licensed attorney who's never practiced law. She is also a poetry author, and I'm here with Christina today. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you so much for having me, Amanda. I'm very grateful to be here with you today.
Thank you. So I'd love if you could get into a little bit of how you ended up becoming a licensed attorney and never practicing law.
Okay, sure. Well, when I was growing up, I always loved writing, but I didn't necessarily look at it as a, career option at the time. And I had a mentor who, when I finished college, suggested that I consider going to law school, not for the purpose of becoming an attorney, but actually for the purpose of becoming a better writer. And so I decided to consider that as an option. And thankfully, I did well on my LSATs and was offered a full scholarship by the Maurice Adine School of Law at Hofstra University. And so I jumped on the opportunity. I mean, it was such a wonderful education that I couldn't pass it up. And, while I was there, I do believe that I really did become a better writer because law school just teaches you not only a whole different way of thought, but also a way of, translating that thought into words. And when I finished, I knew that because I had gone through all of that work, I just wanted to prove to myself that if I had ever wanted to practice, I could do it. So I took the New York State bar and passed and went ahead and got my license. And I keep it active, even though I remain non-practicing, just because I earned it and it's my credential. So that's really the story. I mean, I did try practicing law, through internships during the summers while I was there. And I found, certain areas interesting, but I just didn't see myself being happy as a practicing attorney in the long run. And so I took the education and I went back into business and writing.
Wow. That's so cool. I love that you went to law school for the education behind it and not the traditional, to become a lawyer. So have you always been really into writing?
I loved it as a child. I didn't really think anything of it. I just wrote poems and creative stories, not just for homework, but in my own time. And while I was in college, I wrote a television pilot and actually entered it in a screenwriting competition, and it did pretty well. But I always just did those things, as hobbies. And it wasn't until a few years ago that I decided, hey, let me start actually pursuing this and just see where it goes, in addition to the work that I was doing at the time. And so here I am, I'm on that journey and I'm really enjoying it.
That's amazing. So what made you decide to take the leap of faith?
I had a lot of great support from the people around me. In particular, I got this idea for a novel at one point, and I met one of the women who is now my best friend while I was volunteering. And at the time, I had the idea. And then, when you question yourself and you doubt and you're like, oh, I don't know. This seemed like a great idea when I wrote it down at 3 o'clock in the morning. But now that I'm looking at it over coffee, I don't know, is this crazy? Would anybody actually want to read this? And when I told her the concept, she's like, oh my God, I want to read it. So do me a favor and just write it for me so that I can read it. And then whatever you decide to do with it afterwards, that's totally up to you. And so I said, okay, you know what? I'll do it. So I started where I would write about 1 to 2 chapters per week and send them just to her. And as the story kept going, she's like, oh my God, this is amazing. I want more. You have to do something with this. And so that's when I started doing some more fiction. And I'm actually working on a fiction novel right now that I'm planning on releasing later this year. And in the course of doing that stuff, I got more in touch with myself. And that's really where the poetry came from, because the poetry was just completely unplanned.
Really?
Yes, no, I had no intention of ever writing poetry. That wasn't something I saw myself doing, but it was a very therapeutic process, and I actually enjoyed it a lot.
So, when did you write your first poem?
Well, my first poem, in terms of the books that I've published, I wrote in 2021, which is the same year that I published. So I started with one, and just one turned into another. And then every day I was writing new poetry. And again, I was showing it to the people close to me, and they said, I really think this is something you should consider publishing, which was not an easy decision because, when you're writing fiction or stories, it's not about you. It's these characters that you create. But when you're doing something like poetry, even if it's a general message, a lot of it comes from your own personal experience. So it's like sharing a more intimate part of yourself, which is something that I did not find easy, at least not when I was growing up. I'm growing more accustomed to it now.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So, is there something that made you decide to write your first poem?
Yes, it was basically a therapy process for me. There were a lot of things going on in my life at the time, and one of them, I was in a relationship with a man who's significantly older than me, who happens to now be my husband. And when you're in love with someone, you don't do anything but them, right? And it's about who you are and who that person is, and everything else kind of falls away. And you don't necessarily think about how other people are going to see that relationship, which is good because you really shouldn't care what other people think, but that's a lot easier said than done. And so, when I realized that you don't always get positive feedback being the younger woman involved with an older man, and a lot of the things that can be said are kind of attacks on your character. I had never faced something like that before. So for me, it was very difficult to have people who don't know me at all talking about me, questioning my sincerity, questioning my character, my motives. And so I internalized a lot of what was said. And it came out in the form of a poem called The Gold Digger, where I took all of that negative emotion that I had stored within me and transformed it into something that was powerful. And it was a release for me. And so then that's what started this whole slew of poems. And a lot of the other poems come just from different experiences in my life, and also from the experiences of the women around me. Because when I started showing some of my friends' poems, they began opening up to me about things that were going on in their lives that were affecting them. And I ended up writing some of the poems about those experiences, even though they weren't necessarily my own.
So now, Was this the first time you used writing, a writing modality like this to transform a negative emotion?
Yes, it was. I mean, in the past, I have written to clear my head or get emotions out of me, but that was always in, a long form. And it was incoherent because it was either just in a journal or in something that was just to myself and not something that I would show other people. So this was the first time that I had put it into poetic format and actually began to open up to people about it.
So now, when you wrote the first Gold Digger poem, did you know you would release it or publish it?
No, not at all. That one I wrote, I actually composed it in an email draft. So it's just sitting there in my Gmail account. And I was like, oh, this isn't bad. I was just going to show like my best friend because it rhymed and I thought it was cool. And then she's like, this is powerful. And I said, it felt that way when I wrote it, but I figured it's just because it's my experience and it's what I was feeling at the time. I didn't think it was something that anyone else might find powerful.
Mm. No, I will say I read both your poetry books, and all of the poems were so powerful. I I didn't know what to expect because I haven't read poetry probably since high school, so it's been about 10 years for me. I've done a lot of different reading, but it just hasn't been poetry. But wow, I got chills at times. I loved the way it flowed. It was very powerful. I will say that.
Thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to read both books. Seriously.
No, of course. And I loved the way it flowed, and like it rhymed, but it wasn't like, I don't know have a better word for this, but it wasn't like too rhymey, if that makes sense. Like too much. It was good. It was, yeah, I really liked it.
Yeah, I actually didn't like plan on rhyming. It's kind of just the way it came out. It came out and it had a rhythm that resonated with me. And so I stuck with it. I just,
Mm, okay. I I will say all of the topics, or the, I don't know if I want to call them topics. I don't know the word I want to use, but all the things you talked about in these poems were so relevant that if I haven't related to it in my personal life, I know someone very close to me who has, which I just thought was great. Like, so authentic.
thank you. That's actually the greatest compliment that I can say I get. And I really appreciate it because I know that I did one reading and I had a woman come up to me and she just said, reading these poems made me feel like I'm not alone. And I looked at her and I said, I really appreciate you saying that to me because I'm pretty sure when I wrote them, I thought I was alone. Not, not necessarily in having them, but again, like you don't necessarily think other people are going to relate to your personal experience. But then when you take a step back and you look at it and you realize, even though it's your personal experience, a lot of the feelings and the emotions that we go through are a universal experience. I think, especially, I mean, mine are more geared towards women, but so many women relate to them because, for example, all the ones that are focused on hormones, right? Whether you're going through your period or you're menopausal, it doesn't matter. It's this issue of your hormones are doing something that is impacting your ability to function, right? Either your reason or you're just feeling highly emotional. Maybe you have sweats going on and they just take it together and it's something women connect with. And that's what I really appreciate about the poems.
Mm, I love that. And so you said some of your friends started opening up to you and you started writing about their stories in your poems as well. What did you
Yes.
decide to do that?
When they told me their stories, I felt what they were feeling. And I decided, there's so many women that I'm sure have felt the exact same way. So, for example, one of the stories, my friend had a baby. This was a couple of years before the book was published. And after her pregnancy, she had some type of depression, and basically she had a lot of trouble getting her libido to come back. She just didn't feel sexual at all. And this caused a lot of friction between her and her husband. And, after a while, he became impatient, and he was telling her, you just need to go to the gynecologist and do whatever he says. And the gynecologist that she went to happened to be a man. And he said, there's really nothing wrong here. You just go back on birth control and that'll fix your problems and you'll be fine. And I'm like, okay, so you had something going on with your hormones after having this pregnancy, and now he wants to put you on contraceptive, which is also going to impact your hormones. And she's like, yeah. So she was in a position where she felt completely misunderstood. She felt guilty that she wasn't living up to her husband's expectations, and she was also a new mother. And I was like, wow, that's a lot. That's a lot to take on. That's a lot to process. And me, myself, I've never been pregnant or had a baby, right? But I'm listening to her and I'm like, there's got to be a way to translate this. And that's where the poem Not Myself came into play. And so, yeah, it's related to this story, but at the same time, no matter what type of hormonal issue you may be going through, you're probably not feeling like yourself. So you can take that and run it across whatever works for you.
Okay, no, that makes sense. So, was it difficult for you to actually release all of these poems?
Yes. The first book was a struggle. It took a lot of self-work to get to the point where I was able to release that. And I think ultimately the biggest challenge was taking myself out of it, right? It's like when you write something, or even as an artist, right? If you produce a painting, okay, it's very personal because whatever it was, the inspiration came through you, right? It doesn't matter what your medium is as an artist. So these words came through me based on my experience. But when I'm going to release them into the world, I can't take anything personally for how they're received, right? So if someone doesn't receive them well, I cannot take that as a personal affront against me or what happened in my experience. So that's how I consider removing myself from it. You're just putting it out there, and whatever someone is going to get out of it is what they're going to get out of it, and you have to be able to accept that. So that's what took time to get myself to that point. But I'm very grateful I did. And then I released the second book, and the second book got even more personal. So I think I did a good job getting to the point where everything was okay.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Did anything help you be able to remove yourself from it?
It was probably that reading that I mentioned earlier. So my husband is one of my biggest supporters, and he took a copy of my book and he put it in a specialized gym where part of the treatment that the people who go there get is like a type of laser therapy. So when you're getting it, you're sitting down for about 15 to 20 minutes. So they had like a little library of magazines and books. And he just put a copy there so people could read it while they were getting treatment. And the few of the women who frequented this place, they started asking where they could buy a copy of the book. And that's what turned into, they really liked it. So I sold a lot of copies there, and then they asked me to do a reading. And when I did the reading, that's when the first time that I got to speak to anyone face to face who read the book who wasn't a friend or a family member of mine. And when they were telling me that these are the ones who said, oh my God, I felt like I wasn't alone. I want to take this poem and show it to my husband because I'm hoping that even though he doesn't understand what I'm saying, maybe he'll understand it if he reads this. And that's when I said, oh my God, how could I have ever been so selfish to just be so wrapped up in, well, I don't know, these are my experiences, these are my feelings, I don't know if I should put this out there. And I'm like, but look what it's doing for other people. And it's so important that we all share these experiences, because you never know who's going to relate to something and really benefit from it. And that outweighs, the criticism that some people may have.
Wow. I agree with everything you just said there. I love all that though. That's amazing. I talk all the time about how not everybody's going to agree with what I have to say, and my perspective or things that work for me might not work for you, but they might work for you. And it's the same concept. Some people are going to criticize you, but it's worth it for the people you're helping by sharing that story too.
Exactly. Everyone is going to attract their own tribe of people who really gravitate to what you're saying. And that's a great thing. And even though it's hard sometimes, because honestly, nobody wants to be judged. Nobody wants to be criticized, right? It's difficult. You don't want to read comments where people are just saying awful things about you. Nobody does. But if you can find a way to kind of ignore that or just let it go, then yeah, the people who you're really impacting, it makes it completely worth it to share whatever it is that you have to say, because we all have something important to say.
I love that too. That is so true. We do all have something important to say, and I completely agree with that. So I want to transition a little bit, but I know you are very into horses as well, and I'd love to touch upon how you first got into that.
Okay. I am very into horses. I don't even know when I first got into it. I know that when I was a kid, as far back as I can remember, if you walked into my room, I don't think there was any wall space left for all the posters that were up of different horses. I always loved them since I was a child. And I started riding at 8 years old. And I grew up in New York City, so I could only do it in the summers when we went out of the city, to get some fresh air and sunshine. And so I basically was around horses from 8 to 12. And then we stopped, spending summers on Long Island. And so horses were not really in my life for a long time. And then when I moved back down to Florida, there's so much easier access here that I got back into it in a big way. I started volunteering with equine therapy. And then I was doing an animal Reiki course, and I was introduced to my first wild mustangs, and I just fell in love. They're these amazing animals. And I just started, trying to get involved and learning more about wild horses and what was happening with them out west. And I really felt a connection between what I was doing and how I was feeling and these wild horses, because I think there's a wild part of all of our spirits that doesn't want to be tamed, doesn't want to have to conform to any type of outside expectations, that just wants to feel this complete freedom, to do what you want, to be who you are. And these horses embodied that for me. So, watching videos of them just running, living their lives on the land, not worried, because most domesticated horses, they all have some type of job, right? They could be a lesson horse, a trail horse, a show horse, a barrel horse, whatever it is. And these horses, they don't have jobs. They're free. They run free, in a number of the Western states. And they just became embodiments of freedom for me. And so then I started learning about how the Bureau of Land Management, which is the government agency responsible for managing herd populations on federal lands, they keep decreasing the number of wild horses that are allowed to be on the lands each year. So basically they're rounding up more and more and shrinking the wild horse populations. And so I decided to really get involved and help to advocate for these horses that can't advocate for themselves.
Now, how long have you been doing that? Been advocating?
Well, I've been raising awareness for about a year and a half now. And actually, in December, my husband and I, we were out in California, and we got married at a wild horse sanctuary out there called Return to Freedom. And we should be heading back out there in the next month to do some volunteer work for them as well. So be more on the ground.
Ooh, that's exciting.
Very exciting. I am looking forward to that.
So I'm curious. You mentioned it was difficult releasing the first poetry book. Did you have the same level of difficulty releasing the second?
No, it wasn't the same because I had already done it. So I already had sort of that detachment. There were a few things that were a little more personal. Like I wrote 3 personal essays that were part of the second book. But again, I felt better about sharing my personal stories. So it was just easier to release them. And I was actually excited to do it in a different format that I thought complemented the poetry.
Okay. Now, would you say it felt better because of hearing people's feedback or because you did it before or both?
I think it would be a combination of the two. I mean, it's always helpful to hear that the first one was received well. Even though I try not to focus on that because I know that I'm pretty sure it was Deepak Chopra who said he takes a negative comment and a positive comment in the exact same way, which is totally neutral. He's like, because you don't want to rely on positive feedback to get you to do things. And at the same time, you don't want to let negative feedback stop you from doing things. So the best way to go about it is to just remain completely neutral to both, which I think is a very logical and sensible approach. But obviously, if you read, oh my God, this was the greatest book I ever read, who wouldn't go take something out of it? But, I'm trying to just stay neutral as possible. But
I like that quote. I'm very into quotes. I've never heard that.
Well, I don't know if that's not a direct quote, but that was definitely the gist of what
It's kind of. I like that though, taking the negative and the positive both neutrally.
Yeah, you figure that way you're never dependent on either one.
Wow. No, that makes so much sense. So you're not making decisions or doing things based off of
Exactly. You keep your internal compass sharp. And you just, whatever's feeling right to you, that would be the direction that you go.
Okay. Does anything help you be able to do that?
Staying grounded. If not through meditation, I like to spend time around animals. I find animals to be the best way for me to ground my energy because they take you back to what's simple and what's real. So, if you get caught up in the day-to-day or your task list, I will literally stop and go sit outside with my cats, and they're just content being who they are, and that's enough. They don't care how many things they got done in a day. Bless them. So just spending time with them, or spending time with horses, especially for me, that's my best way of just getting back to my internal compass. I guess that makes it point north. And then once it's pointing north, I can figure out which way it wants to turn.
What do you mean by that?
Well, when you start out with a regular compass, it's always pointing north, right? So you can figure out which way is north, then you figure out the ways that you're going. So if my compass is spinning like this because I've got 50 things on my to-do list, I sit down with my animals and it stops. It goes back to where it's supposed to be. And then I'm in a position where I can make my next move.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is that something you do when you're not sure of what move to do next?
If I'm really not sure, I take a step back and I go for a walk in nature. I sit with the cats, but I do believe that I use somewhat of a feeling kind of system. I mean, there's some logic too, because you can't take the lawyer out of the girl, even if she's not practicing. But I always believe that instead of like forcing something, especially a decision about where you're going, I want to make it from a place where I feel good about that decision. And good to me means just like I feel at peace with it. So when possible, yeah, I would definitely take a step back and come back to it when I'm feeling more centered.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So I want to transition a little bit, and now whatever you're comfortable with sharing in terms of that. But I'm curious if you could touch a little bit upon how the transition into your relationship went.
Um, well, I actually met my husband in an interview. I was writing for a newsletter, and he was the person I was tasked with interviewing. And so when I met him, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but when you meet someone and you've met them before, there's like you look in their eyes and there's some recognition, there's a familiarity, and you're like, I don't know where I've met you before, even if it's not in this lifetime, in another lifetime, but you spark with me. And that during this process, there was like this magnetic energy between us, like just pulling you closer and closer together. And, I knew he was older than me. I'm not blind, but I didn't really care. I mean, when you feel like, or when I feel, I'm starting to stop saying you, but when I feel a connection that strong, the last thing I'm thinking about is logistics, like age, because it's just a number. It's not a measure of who a person is. And, I could tell you that he has a lot more energy than me. And, so it's like, it was an interesting start because, he did a very cute move where we were sitting having lunch, and this was after the completion of the interview process, and I had already written the article, and so it was basically like a, hey, it's published lunch. And you can feel the chemistry in the air, right? But nobody has actually made any kind of move. And he just takes his driver's license and casually slides it across the table. And I look at it and I'm like, yeah, got it here. And we started spending, a lot of time together after that. And there was really there was nothing that was going to hold us back from each other. So here we are a few years later and we're married. So that's basically what happened.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. Now, how soon After you guys got together, did you write the poem?
About 2 years. Yes, 2 years.
Was there something that made you decide 2 years later that now you wanted to start writing about it?
Um, I don't really think there was a moment where I just decided. I think that, you go through a phase when you first meet someone where you're almost impervious, right? They call it the honeymoon stage, right? Where you're just totally absorbed in the other person that you don't really notice what might be happening around you. And, as you spend more and more time together and you start to notice, right? Or you go to social events with this person where you're exposed to certain opinions and other people's judgments. That's when, I started, I guess, collecting in a way. It's like you can't help you hear it, you feel it. When you're in a situation where you can just feel that someone has an opinion about you.
Yeah.
So it's just like you kind of absorb all of that. And if you don't do anything about it, I guess I consider it like a sponge where I reached my saturation point, and that's when the poem came out. So it was like wringing out all of this stuff that I had stored within me and hadn't found an outlet for before.
And then poetry became that outlet for you.
It did. And then it showed me that I actually had a lot in me, a lot that had nothing to do with that relationship, but that was just from other experiences in life that also needed to be, taken out of my system in order for me to grow and move forward. So it was really a blessing. And that's what they say. I think they say a lot, you go through experiences and they may be very unwanted and painful at the time, but sometimes they're showing you exactly what you need in order to move forward. And I needed to deal with a lot of the things that I had stored inside me and not released because I admit, growing up, I was very much introverted. I was not the kid to raise your hand and, participate and really wear my feelings on my sleeves. And so sometimes I think what happens is, you bottle up too much and then you really just have to cleanse.
That makes complete sense. Now, I'm curious. That the gold digger one makes sense, but is there something that helped you come up with the titles for the poems?
Not really. I mean, some of them are really simple, like menstruation. It's like just very self-explanatory.
That's true. No, I get that. I get that. So, do you plan on writing another poetry book?
I do. I have another one in mind that I have started working on along with my fiction series. And I'm also going to be doing a lot of blogging about some of the wild horse adventures. So I have a lot of new ideas and things that I want to be able to launch a little bit later this year.
So cool. So I typically end my podcast with 2 segments. Have you heard of a man named Jay Shetty?
Yes.
So he has a podcast called On Purpose, and I love it. And he typically ends his podcast with 2 segments, and I love them. So I started incorporating them. The first segment is called The Many Sides to Us. And there's 5 questions, and they need to be answered in 1 word each.
Okay, that's cool.
First one. What is 1 word someone who was meeting you for the first time would use to describe you as?
Observant.
Okay. Number 2. What is one word that someone who knows you extremely well would use to describe you?
Creative.
Number 3. What is one word you'd use to describe yourself?
Multifaceted.
I like that word. Number 4. What is one word that if someone didn't agree with you or didn't agree with your mindset, they would use to describe you as?
That's a tough one. Emotional? Maybe.
Okay. What is one word that you're trying to embody right now?
Peacefulness.
Then the second segment is the final 5, and these can be answered in up to a sentence.
Okay. I can see a little more room to work.
And number 1, what is the best piece of advice you've heard or received?
Ever?
Yes.
Oh, okay. 36 years condensed into one sentence. Okay. Like,
I've never had anybody ask me if I meant ever.
okay, this is gonna sound cliche, but it really is like stay true to who you are.
Okay. Number 2, what is the worst piece of advice you've heard or received?
Keep trying to prove that you're right.
Okay. Number 3, what is something that you used to value that you no longer value?
I used to value luxury watches a lot more than I do. I mean, this is more than one sentence. I apologize. I make it a run on sentence. I used to look at them kind of as a status symbol that you made it. And, we had one in my family. And now I just feel no attachment to it. I don't see the value in the brand name the way that I used to. Even though it's still, a beautiful timepiece, it's just not necessary.
Okay. Number 4, if you could describe what you would want your legacy to be as if someone was reading it, what would you want it to say?
She valued women and animals as sentient beings and fought for others to understand and look at them the same way.
Okay. Number 5, if you could create one law in the world that everyone had to follow, what would it be? And I'm going to want to know why.
One law. My law would be that humans are not allowed to use animals as commodities. And my reason for that, not just as an animal lover, but I think that we still use people too much as commodities. And people are generally seen as more important than animals. So if we can really treat animals as sentient beings and not look at them just as a source for food or experimentation or entertainment, then I'm hoping we would be able to then look at people the same way, and that it would produce an environment where we have more respect and appreciation for both.
Okay. Now I have one more personal question for you. But can you share some or all of the resources that you utilize consistently to remain successful in your life?
Sure. So I believe never stop learning. I am always reading at least one book. They vary. I love to read fiction, which inspires my creativity and keeps me sharp. And I also love to read, personal help books. So right now, I just got a copy of Worthy by Jamie Kern Lima. She's the founder of It Cosmetics, and I saw her at a Tony Robbins conference a few years ago. And I just really resonated with her. I thought she was super motivational. And so I read her memoir, and I recommend that too. And now she came out with Worthy, which is a book teaching you how to believe in your own self-worth. So I just started it, so I can't say how it is, but I'm sure it's great. I also like to listen to podcasts where people are sharing their paths to success. One of the ones who also has a really interesting story, if you haven't heard it, is Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx. And all of these women, I mean, don't get me wrong, I also love Tony Robbins. Like I said, I went to his conference, which I also recommend, because the greatest thing about that was that it was in person and you're surrounded by people also looking for this way to improve their mindsets and their physicality. And so when you're in a group like that, you get more motivated because everybody's looking to do the same thing. So there's this cohesive energy all going in a great direction. I do love Jay Shetty too. I just listened to him speak. I didn't realize his questions were going to be that hard or when you speak on the spot.
I know. I know. I heard him ask them for the first time on a podcast, and I was like, Jay. And it was a pretty famous person. I can't remember, but they were having a hard time, and I was like, these are good.
They're great. I like. So he doesn't give you those to prepare. He's like, no, let's see what you can come up with right now. You don't need to prepare. but yeah, definitely reading podcasts and definitely attending motivational conferences as well. Those are all things that I do. I also love to exercise. For me, exercise clears my mind every day and creates more space for creativity. Eating healthy is, I guess, a given. and and then journaling, because you got to process whatever it is that you're going through. So even if you just write yourself a couple of sentences every day, I find it's a good way to just check in and see where you're at. Even if you're having a great day, I write down, everything's really awesome today. I'm grateful for that. I have kept a gratitude journal in the past, but I don't consistently do that right now. And if you're riding in the car, YouTube is the best source for just like pop on an Esther Hicks video. And it's a great way to spend like 15, 20 minutes just listening to something that teaches you about the law of attraction or offers a different perspective or way to look at something that might, change your mindset.
Wow, awesome. Thank you so much for all of that. I love all the things that you mentioned. That's thank you. Now, is there anything that I didn't ask you or we didn't touch upon that you want to share with the listeners? No pressure. I do just like to throw that out there just in case.
That's funny because when I interview people, I end on that same question. I always say that. It's like, as an interviewer, right, you have all these questions and you listen and they're like, wait, is there anything that I didn't say that you think should get said? And it's interesting the varied responses that you get.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
But I think we've covered a lot, and I'm really grateful to be here with you and that you're doing this, because I really just think it's important for all of us to be more open with our personal experiences. I think that's the biggest thing.
I completely agree with that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you speaking with me and taking the time to come on Mander's Mindset.
It's been a pleasure being here, so thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, of course. And where can the listeners connect with you?
Well, my website is christinatsirkas.com. It's under construction, but it should be up again very soon. Until then, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Christina Unscripted.
Okay, awesome. And I will link all of Christina's info in the show notes so you guys can connect with her directly. And thanks, guys. Hey guys, Manders here with a few key takeaways from my awesome conversation with Christina. And honestly, guys, if you take one thing from this conversation, I hope it's that you follow your heart and you don't listen or worry about the logistics of life. Because that's exactly what Christina did in her personal romantic life and in her professional career life. She knew she loved writing. She didn't initially think she could see it as a career, but she took that leap. And I encourage all of you to take that leap and follow your heart. Because, guys, I say this to you all the time, but we're healed and we're not. So if there's something you want to do, if there's something your heart desires, go after it. She also talked about how pain teaches you and you learn from those experiences. Christina also emphasized the power and the true importance of everyone sharing their story, because you never know who's going to benefit from it, and somebody will. It might not benefit everyone, and you are likely to get criticism from some people. There's always going to be haters. But the people it is meant, you're sharing it for that reason. So I also encourage you to step out of your comfort zone and share more of your story. That is something I personally have been trying to do even more so. And it's not the easiest thing to do, but it'll help you internally release and just let go. And it will also help other people, because you never know who is struggling with what or who needs to hear what you have to say. And I'm going to leave you all with one of my personal favorite poems that Christina wrote. I've read her 2 poetry books, and honestly, guys, I haven't read poetry in probably 10 years, maybe more, because they were all so relatable to real life and real life experiences, which I've really resonated with. I think personally, when I was younger reading poetry, I don't think I understood the full concept. This is one of my favorite poems that Christina wrote in her Femme Metamorphosis book. And I will link both of the books in the show notes so you guys can get her books directly. But this one is called The Rose. Like a rose, I protect myself from those who only want to take from me, be it love, energy, or dignity. Deep inside my thorny exterior is a version of me far superior, one that embraces her femininity, unafraid of her own divinity. And it rhymes, but even as I mentioned in the episode, it's not too rhymey. It rhymes just enough. She also wrote longer essays in this second book as well, which gave it an even more personal touch into who she is and more about her. And especially for my ladies out there, y'all will really resonate with her poetry. So I highly encourage you to check it out. Available on Amazon. You can get it for free on the Kindle, wherever you check out your books. I highly encourage you to check it out. And I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I hope you took a lot from it. I want to remind you of one more thing. You can do things in any way. And if you want something, even if it's not for the traditional reasons that other people in society want it, example, Christina wanting to go to law school for the education and for the writing knowledge she would gain, it helped her, set her off. So if there is something in your life you want, you think would benefit you, go fucking get it, guys. We're here, then we're not. And I will be saying that until I'm not here. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mander's Mindset, and stay tuned for the next one. Thanks, guys. In case no one told you today, I'm proud of you. I'm rooting for you. And you got this. As always, if you enjoyed the show, I would really appreciate it if you would leave me a 5-star rating, leave a review, and share it with anyone you think would benefit from this. And don't forget, you are only one mindset shift away from shifting your life. Thanks, guys. Until next time.